Hello, everybody. I've always loved horror, even since I was a little kid watching the Universal Monster movies with my grandmother. Anything from Dracula to Creature of the Black Lagoon, I was obsessed with. However, while I feel that did play a big part in my love for horror, I think the thing that pushed me over the edge with my love of it, and even having a whole YouTube channel dedicated to covering horror topics, would be creepypastas. Now, I've talked about creepypastas before on this channel, but for those that don't know, the term creepypasta originates from the term copy-paste. Basically, these were horror stories that were copy and pasted around the internet and sent to people, and therefore there was a fun play on words that it was creepy pasta. Now, these stories have existed for quite a while. I covered what is arguably the first creepypasta some time ago with my Ted the Caver video. However, as many of you surely know, there was a big creepypasta boom in the late 2000s and early 2010s. My introduction to creepypastas is rather unorthodox. See, around the time creepypastas were on the rise, so too was a little game called Minecraft. And like most people my age, as a kid, I was obsessed with Minecraft. And even though at the time all I had was Pocket Edition on my iPod Touch, I still would go on YouTube and watch all the mod showcases and reviews. One such mod showcase was the Creepypasta mod. This was the first time that I had ever heard of creepypastas. So I clicked on this video and watched it and was immediately introduced to characters such as Jeff the Killer, Slenderman, The Rake, Smile Dog, and so many others. These characters and their designs, even in their Minecraft forms, intrigued me. So I decided when I was done watching videos on the Minecraft Creepypasta mod that I would go on and just search Minecraft Creepypasta in the search bar. Now, I'm not exactly sure how I found it, but I ended up finding a video titled Minecraft Creepypasta Film No End House. This was a video published by a YouTuber called Marsh Minecraft Videos. This video had Creeps McPasta's narration of the creepypasta No End House and put it over a Minecraft reconstruction of the story. So as events transpired in the story, so too did they transpire in Minecraft. No End House basically follows the story of a guy who hears from his friend about this haunted house that no one has made it through. If they do, they get a cash prize of a substantial amount. Feeling that he can make it through no problem, the protagonist decides to go through and try and win. And it starts off fine. The first few rooms have decorations such as just skeletons or cobwebs that you would find at your local Halloween store. However, as it goes, it gets stranger and stranger. He begins walking through rooms that shouldn't exist just based off their size. He can see the sky inside. He even comes across himself in one of the rooms. The story is rather long, so I won't get into much detail about it here, especially because it was my first creepypasta, so there's a very good chance I end up making a whole video on it at some point. But it nonetheless got me hooked on creepypastas, and I decided to check out more and more and more. So I hope this video will be as nostalgic for some of you guys as it is for me. And for those of you that aren't familiar with creepypastas, I hope you enjoy traveling back in time with the rest of us to learn about a strange time period in internet horror. And I'll be honest, after my Ted the Caver video, I decided I wanted to go back and look at some of these creepypastas just to see how they hold up today. And in doing so, I found a mixed bag of quality. Some were absolutely outstanding, even better than I remember, and some that I loved were actually terrible. So I thought it would be fun to take a look back at that time period and talk about some of the old creepypastas, the more iconic ones, and see where they stand today. Now, it is no surprise that I was not able to cover every influential creepypasta. There are simply too many to cover. But I think I did a good job of collecting the most famous, summarizing them here, and then presenting them to you guys to see where they stand. After all, this was an important time in internet horror, and is basically a piece of history from it. This was a time period full of tropes and cliches, and I can say confidently, without them, this channel wouldn't exist. As I'm sure most of you that are familiar with creepypastas in this time period are aware, a lot of them were unnecessarily edgy, like stuff would just happen just to show how like dark or serious it is, without actually having any merit to the plot. As such, I'm going to try and tell these stories in the most YouTube friendly way I can, so just please bear with me while I try and work my way through some of these. So without further ado, I think it's time we dive in and check out some early creepypastas. One of the most famous stories of this time period would be that of Jeff the Killer. This character gained a lot of fame and has therefore appeared in probably countless creepypasta stories. However, for the purpose of today's video, we are going to look at the most famous appearance of him, as well as what could be regarded as his origin story, Go to Sleep, Jeff the Killer. The story sets the stage with a clip from a local newspaper about an unknown killer who is still at large. A young boy has actually survived an attack from this killer and is telling his story to the paper. A young boy is woken up from a bad dream. He looks around his room and sees that his window is open, regardless of the fact that he remembered closing it the night before he went to bed. He gets up and shuts it and then tries to go back to sleep. Yet he has this awful feeling, a feeling as though he is being watched. He opens his eyes once again and sees, in the darkness, peering back at him, a pair of eyes. He says that these are not normal eyes. No, they're deranged, dark eyes. Eyes of a madman, of a killer. His eyes pan down from this thing's face to see the smile. A wide smile. This is the smile of a madman. Every tooth exposed. It seems as though the smile is unnaturally long for a human. This causes the boy's blood to run cold, and he becomes terrified. The thing leans in. It gets close to the boy and says one phrase that will haunt him for the rest of his life. It simply says, "Go to sleep." The boy lets out a blood-curdling scream which causes the man in front of him to pull out a knife and jump on the bed ready to attack him. The boy fights back though, kicking, punching, clawing, anything he can do to keep this thing from ending his life. His father, hearing the commotion from the bedroom, bolts in through the bedroom door, shotgun in hand. The man turns his attention from the boy to his father and throws the knife, which digs deep into the man's shoulder. The man moved in to finish the father off, when in the background, he hears police sirens. One of the neighbors had heard the commotion and called the police. The man then runs down the hallway and jumps through a window, escaping into the dark night below. This is our first introduction to Jeff the Killer. Now, ignoring just that is not how the newspaper would cover this story. It does a good job of setting into motion what we're dealing with here. Jeff is basically a monster, and is perceived as much through the boy who survived the attack based on the sickening smile and the deranged eyes. But how did he become this way? And that's what we find out through the rest of the story. Jeff, his brother Lou, and his parents all moved into a new neighborhood following his father's promotion at work. This was a nicer neighborhood than the one that they lived at before. Upon their moving in, one of their neighbors comes over with her young son. The parents begin talking for a while, and the mother invites Jeff and Lou to come to her son's birthday party. Jeff and Lou are about to decline whenever their mother says yes, they would love to come. This is much to Jeff and Lou's dismay, who do not want to attend some little kid's birthday party, but their mother tells her that in order to fit in the new neighborhood, they have to show that they want to meet their neighbors and be a part of things. So Jeff, knowing that there's no way to win against his mother on this one, just goes to his room. It is when he's laying in bed that he gets this strange feeling. Upon their first day at their new school, Jeff and Lou are waiting at the bus stop when they hear skateboards roll up by them. They look over and see a group of 3 kids who introduce themselves as Keith, Troy, and their leader, Randy. They say that they've never seen Jeff and Lou around, who proceed to tell them that they just moved in. Randy says that there is a bus tax for new people, and Jeff, obviously not wanting to pay money to this bully, says, "We're not paying you, man, we're just waiting on the bus." Randy, Keith, and Troy respond rationally and draw knives, telling them that they are going to pay them or they're going to cut them up. These are like young teens at the oldest, by the way. It is then that Jeff gets that feeling once again. He kind of pushes Lou off to the side, makes him get away from the situation, and then proceeds to 1v3 these guys and absolutely decimates them. It is like a scene from John Wick. He's like punching them in the throat and then catching their knife midair and cutting them and stuff. Like, it is unreal, especially considering, like I said, the oldest, absolute oldest. This kid is like 15. So now It is just Jeff, without a scratch on him by the way, just standing over these 3 beaten and bloodied kids who are covered in stab and cut wounds, bruises, but they don't have time to sit here for too long because they look up and see a school bus is coming. Wanting to get the heck out of there so they don't face any trouble, they run away. That night there is a knock at Jeff's family's door. It is the police who have come to arrest Jeff and Lou for the attack against Randy, Keith, and Troy. Because Jeff and Lou ran, they didn't actually get to share their side of the story, that it was mostly self-defense, and there were witnesses that saw them fleeing the scene of the crime. Jeff is ready to go to jail. However, Lou comes down and says Jeff didn't do anything, that it was all him. Jeff tries to argue that it wasn't Lou, that it was all him. However, for whatever reason, the cops believe Lou over Jeff, even though there's really no reason to, and they arrest Lou and take him to jail. Jeff is in a slump for a few days. He misses his brother dearly, and yet there is nothing he can do about it. One morning he is awoken by his mother, who comes into his room and just says today's the day. What she is referring to is the birthday party that she said her sons would attend at the beginning of the story. Jeff says that he's not in the mood to go, as just a few days prior, his brother was arrested for a crime he committed. So Jeff gets dressed and heads downstairs to see his parents in a suit and a dress. This is a kid's birthday party. Jeff tells them they're dressed too nicely, to which they say they need him to go dress nice because they want to make a good impression, again, for a child's birthday party. So Jeff goes up and tries to change. He finds black dress pants, but can't find a nice shirt to match, so he puts on a white hoodie. They then head to the party, and as the kids are a little younger than Jeff, he just kind of stands around awkwardly for a while. One of the little kids comes up to Jeff and hands him a toy gun, asking if he would like to play. Jeff says no, he doesn't want to play a stupid kids game, but when the kid begs, Jeff gives in, and he starts to play cowboys with the kids. He actually finds himself having a bit of fun, not necessarily because the game they're playing is fun, but more so because this was the first time in a while that Lou hadn't been on his mind. However, in the middle of their playing, he hears a sound once more. It is the sound of skateboards on pavement. Suddenly, he sees 3 figures on skateboards jump over the fence and land perfectly on their boards. As I'm sure you can guess, these 3 figures are Randy, Keith, and Troy, who have come to finish the job on Jeff. These are kids. Jeff tells them that they're even. He beat the crap out of them, and they sent his brother to juvie, to which Randy actually says, "I don't go for even, I go for the win." Then the rematch of the century happens between Jeff and Randy, Keith, and Troy. Only this time, Randy, Keith, and Troy didn't bring knives, they brought guns to a child's birthday party for this one guy they had a fight with on the street. So, through various means, the fight goes on. Luckily, no one shoots Jeff. He manages, for the most part, to get their guns away from them. And the fight carries on inside. And Jeff kills them. Like, all of them. Randy's the last one left standing, but because of the way the fight went, various household items were broken near Jeff. He was covered in a bottle of vodka that was shot from above him and then kind of dripped all over him, and then bleach as well. And by the time Keith and Troy are taken out, it is just Randy and Jeff, and their fight heads to the bathroom. Jeff has Randy beaten, and by beaten I mean he has Randy bleeding out, and he's going to die. Realizing this, Randy starts laughing. When Jeff asks what's funny, Randy says, "You're covered in bleach and vodka," and then pulls out a lighter and throws it on Jeff, erupting Jeff into a ball of fire. Jeff loses consciousness and awakens in the hospital. There are bandages all over his body and he can't see. His family tells him he was in an accident, you could say that, and that the doctors are doing the best they can to get him better. They hired the best plastic surgeons to fix the damage that was done to him, and they just need to wait on the wounds to heal. Whenever it is finally time for the bandages to come off, upon their removal, the doctor winces, and the family is visibly upset by what they see. Jeff wants to see what has happened to him. He gets up and heads to the mirror in his room to see that his skin has been burned to a ghastly shade of white. His hair, singed from the fire, is now black. Ignoring the fact that that is just not what happens when you're burnt, Jeff looks in the mirror and begins to laugh, saying he loves the way he looks, that it is perfect, and that he's finally beautiful. Jeff's family, rightfully, ask the doctor, should we be concerned about this? To which he says, oh no, this happens all the time. If he's still being weird in a week, bring him back and we'll do some psych evals. But no, let this child who has had his life permanently altered, just let him go home tonight. They're unaware that with everything that has happened, Jeff's psyche has snapped. No longer is this Jeff, the kind boy that presumably existed before the story. Jeff has basically been replaced with that feeling that he had when he attacked the bullies. That night, Jeff's mother is awoken by the sound of something in the bathroom. She gets out of bed and goes to it to see Jeff with a knife cutting a smile into his face. On top of that, he has used a lighter to singe off his eyelids. His justification for this is that he could not continue to smile because his mouth hurt, but he wanted to keep smiling at his new appearance because he loved it so much. Justification for the eyeballs is similar, as he wanted to always be able to see his face, but he was getting tired and his eyes were closing. I'm pretty sure burning off your eyelids would make you blind after a time, but I'm not a doctor, so I don't know. Jeff's mother is rightfully disturbed by this and heads back to her bedroom, as she said she wants to get Jeff's father to come see it. She's humoring him, saying she wants him to see how good it looks. However, when she heads back to the room and wakes up her husband, she tells him to grab the gun because they need to put down their son. Parents of the year. Jeff heard her saying that to her husband, though. Even ignoring the fact that he's insane, he's rightfully upset that his parents want to kill him, so he uses the knife that he used to, cut the smile into his mouth, and tells his parents to go to sleep before killing them. He then heads to his brother Lou's room and does the same thing, telling him to go to sleep. Yeah, I kind of made fun of the story as I went along and read it, but I was entertained the whole time at least. Yes, there is a lot of absurdities, like Jeff just being this superhuman teenager who can just absolutely murk anyone and everyone. The way that he was burned, too, that is just not how people burn. But the story was kind of fun. Was it good? No. But it was fun. Also, we're not attacking the authors of any of the stories we're covering today, because as much as I'm poking fun at this story, it was super important to my core formative years. It was one of my favorite creepypastas of this time period, and I was a big fan, especially of the expanded work that was done, which we'll talk about in a second. But please, with all these stories, we're just having some fun looking at them. No attacks on any of the authors. Every single story we'll be covering today is a story I enjoy for one reason or another. Some because they're good, some because they're so bad they're good, some just because of nostalgia. As I'm sure most of you are aware, there is a lot more to Jeff the Killer than just the base story. There are additional characters such as Jane the Killer. Jane the Killer is a rival to Jeff the Killer. She will do anything in her power to stop Jeff because she hates him so much. And she has good reason to, as Jeff murdered her entire family. If I recall correctly, this was in an attempt to make her like him, but Jane wasn't completely insane, so she dedicated the rest of her days to stopping Jeff the Killer. The way I see it, there's kind of two approaches that you can take to the storytelling. On one path, there is the more fanfiction-y route of Jeff the Killer. These are where he is like a cool, calm, and collected serial killer. And oftentimes these versions of the character would have him interact with other creepypasta characters. There's several stories of Jeff the Killer versus Jane the Killer, which makes sense as Jane does not exist without Jeff. However, there is also Jeff the Killer versus Slender Man, which we will talk about very soon, I promise. And stories like that that are just a lot of fun. Mr. Creepypasta narrated both those two stories that I talked about, so I'd recommend talking about those if you want a kind of fun, more nostalgic look at the character. However, if you want to see the character done well, I would recommend two options. One would be a horror writer called Vincent Menacava. He has a whole collection of short stories that are exceptional, and at least twice as far as I can recall, he has done a short about Jeff the Killer. Now, in the first path of stories I talked about, a lot of people describe Jeff as still, like, seeing him, like, through his scars and all. But Vincent Menacava looks at the character, this madman with deranged eyes and a smile cut into his face, burnt leathery skin and singed black hair. He took that and made something terrifying. To further explain what I'm talking about, I would like to read an excerpt from Vincent Menacava's story, Right on Time. This is from the point of view of someone who is about to be attacked by Jeff. He watched silently as the man, or animal, or thing that had attacked him reached the bottom step and stood up on 2 feet, uncurling its spine like a cobra dancing for a snake charmer. The shaggy head of dark, matted hair turned in his direction, and now he could see a face. A human face, or at least one that used to belong to a human. His stalker wore a skeleton smile, no lips and a set of flat white teeth that contrasted bitterly against purple gums. Like a rotting corpse, it had no nose, and its pallid complexion looked snow white in the moonlight seeping into the living room. In its hand, it held an 8-inch Bowie knife, coated in blood. I don't want to give away any more of the story, but as you can see, people can take Jeff the Killer and make him creepy, and that whole story is very excellent. By the way, I would recommend checking it out if you haven't already. There is also the Jeff the Killer 2015 series by K. Banning Kellum. This is a more realistic look at the killer. For example, instead of being burnt because he's covered in bleach and vodka and having his skin turn white and his hair singed black, because once again, that's not how burns work. Instead, he was hit with a flare gun on the side of his face, which caused a smile to kind of burn as the flare went up. And it sounds kind of weird, but I promise it's actually a very good story. I haven't finished it, it's very long, there's several parts, but it's a very interesting and engaging story. This is proof that even though some of the stories might be a little silly, they can still be covered in either fun and exciting ways, or new and terrifying ways, which is really something I think Creepypasta does well. It opens up the doors for people to experiment and try new things with them. But as I mentioned a minute ago, I think it's time we talk about the Slender Man. The Slender Man is a being who is unhumanly tall. He has a blank white face, typically wears a suit, and in some iterations will occasionally have like tentacles like coming out of his back. He's said to be able to teleport, as well as when he is near a camera, it gets all staticky. In many stories, the people being pursued by the Slender Man use a camera as a way to tell if he is near. Slender Man has been more famous through games like Slender the 8 Pages, or Slender the Arrival, or web series such as the impeccable Marble Hornets, which I'm not going to get into that much here, as it is something that I will almost definitely make a video on someday. Technically, the being in that isn't Slender Man, it's the operator, but as it contributed so much to Slender Man's lore, it is important to bring up when talking about Slender Man. Now, he didn't actually even start as a creepypasta. He instead started as a post to the Something Awful forums, in which a series of images was posted with him in the background lurking. This inspired the lore that he typically stalks children. He will typically stalk them and then lure them out somewhere. There's a lot to the Slender Man lore, and I think Slender Man works to the state super well as a horror icon, especially in regards to internet horror. There's something about him just always watching, working in the background, that is just so profoundly sickening that no matter where you go, no matter what you do, he can always be there, watching you, just waiting for the right moment that breaks you down, where you're at your most vulnerable, so he can strike. However, unfortunately, You can't talk about Slenderman without bringing up the elephant in the room. I'm not going to dwell on it much at all because, frankly, I don't feel it's my place to. But there was a real-life crime involving Slenderman. Basically, these two girls took their friend into the woods and attempted to kill her in order to appease the Slenderman. Obviously, these two girls were mentally unwell, and thankfully, the girl that was attacked survived. But I did want to mention it here just as a warning to everyone. Every single story we're covering today did not happen. I promise it didn't. All these characters are make-believe. Everyone to speak good to one another. I'm sorry to have brought the mood down there, but it is something important to discuss when talking about internet horror and the Slenderman, unfortunately. More recently, there was a movie made about Slenderman, which was absolutely terrible. I wouldn't recommend it. But overall, the character is iconic with creepypastas. You can't bring them up without talking about him. Smile Dog is another character who is hard to talk about creepypastas without bringing up. Smile Dog is basically a cursed image in which it is said that if you see this image, you will be plagued by nightmares and hallucinations of the Smile Dog. Typically, one would receive this image through a chain email that someone would send to you with the caption, "Spread the word." If the person does spread the word and email it or send it on to someone else, they will be rid of the curse. However, if they do not, then they will be plagued with the nightmares and hallucinations that I mentioned earlier, oftentimes until they unalived themselves. I can tell you I've looked at this image countless times. Nothing's happened. But if you are weary about that, then look away in 3, 2, 1. This is the image in question. It is a husky with a human mouth peering into the camera. Now they say once you look at it for too long, it contorts into this image, which is a much more hellish and terrifying version. If anyone looked away, you're good to look now. It's gone. I'll be honest, I thought the idea of Smile Dog was interesting. It's this curse that gets passed around and you have the option to get rid of it easily. You just send it to someone. But the dilemma comes in do you do it or not? Do you subject someone else to this fate knowing that if they don't pass it along, they will likely, quit living? Or do you deal with the curse, knowing that that could happen to you but you don't inflict it upon anyone else? It's a really cool concept to think about, especially in terms of horror. But ultimately, Smile Dog never really scared me. I didn't think the image was that creepy. I thought it was kind of goofy, if we're being honest. However, just like I said, that idea of the chain email containing a curse is just such an early 2000s internet horror thing that I can't help but feel nostalgic for it. Another story that never quite creeped me out but is also unbelievably important when discussing creepypastas is that of Eyeless Jack. Eyeless Jack follows our protagonist, a man named Mitch, who has recently moved in with his brother. Things are going well for a time, until one morning, Mitch wakes up with a gash on the side of his face. He goes to the hospital to check it out, as he hadn't done anything that would merit having any cut on him, and the doctors check it out, and then note there's something far more alarming that Mitch didn't notice. There is a kidney missing from him. Someone had surgically removed his kidney and stitched it back up, and Mitch just didn't feel that the next day. The doctor literally just goes, "Somehow your kidney's been removed. We don't know how. Sorry, Mitch." And send him home. He just had an amateur major surgery done to him, and they just sent him home. So Mitch goes home and goes to bed that night. Mitch is awoken, however, to see a silhouette peering over him. It takes him a minute in the darkness to see what it is that he is looking at. But when his eyes adjust, he sees that the thing looming over his bed is wearing a dark blue mask with empty eye sockets. It has no eyes, but in its place is this kind of black goo dripping out from the empty holes. So Mitch, terrified by this thing that is looming overhead, does the only natural thing he can think to do. He reaches over to his bedside table, grabs his camera, and takes a picture. The kid in the Jeff the Killer story saw this thing peering over his bed and started kicking and screaming and punching. Mitch takes a photo and then decides it's time to start kicking and punching and screaming when the thing jumps on him. Mitch is able to break free and runs outside of the house. He runs into the woods nearby, but trips and falls and becomes unconscious as he hits his head on the way down. Mitch, once again, wakes up in the hospital. He has a concussion, but besides that, he is fine. However, the doctor breaks the news to him that his brother is dead. He says Mitch's parents are coming to collect him so he can go back to the house and get his things. Mitch is ultimately just kind of bummed out by this. There's no real strong emotion present in the story. So he goes home to get his things, and they just left his brother's body there. It is just sitting in the middle of the floor. There are no cops there, like, that are trying to do a crime scene analysis or anything. Nothing. It is literally just there. Mitch tries to avoid looking at it, but he sees something is laying next to it. He goes up closely and sees that laying next to his brother's deceased body is Mitch's kidney that had been removed, with a bite out of it. And around the bite marks is the black ooze that was dripping out of the thing's eyes. So there was actually an origin story made for Eyeless Jack, like by a fan, so you can kind of consider it canon if you want. Basically, it ends up being that Jack was a kid in college who got interested in a girl. And this girl, unbeknownst to Jack, invites him to a cult where they proceed to put a mask on him, put like burning tar or something in his eyes to kill him, and then let some ancient, like, Lovecraftian god possess him, who then awakens and kills all of them. But yeah, ultimately, Eyeless Jack is one of those stories that just, once again, never really did it to me. But on the subject of creepypasta characters named Jack, who have a strange origin story made sometime after the initial story was made, we go on to Laughing Jack. Laughing Jack follows a single father who has just acquired a new home with his young son. One day, while his son is playing out in the yard, he hears him talking to someone, yet when he looks out the window, he doesn't see who. When his son comes in, he asks who he was talking to which the boy replies, his friend Laughing Jack. His father asks, "Who is this Laughing Jack?" To which the boy says it is a clown. Realizing that his son is likely talking to an imaginary friend, he doesn't press the issue any further. That night, however, the father is plagued by nightmares. In his dream, the father is alone in an empty circus. He begins to walk around, not knowing where to go until he hears, when from somewhere out in the distance, the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. Unable to help himself, he follows it, walking through this eerie empty circus. He arrives at the tent that it is playing from, and when he walks through the door, he sees children. Ghastly children. This strikes him to his core, as dozens of them seem to keep appearing from nowhere. They surround him and begin clawing at his flesh, which causes him to wake up. When he does, he sees that some of his children's toys are in his bedroom. He figures that his son had simply woken up earlier than him and put the toys in there, so he goes to return them to his son's room to see that his son is still asleep. When his son finally does wake up, he questions him about it, and the son says that it was Laughing Jack who had done it. The father laughs this off and tells his son just to tell Laughing Jack to keep the toys in his son's room. The son nods and goes about his day. Later on, the father lies down to take a nap, but accidentally loses track of time. When he wakes up, he realizes he has been asleep for hours, and his son is not in his house. He goes about screaming, looking for his son to try and find him, and when he finally does, he sees that he is outside by the road with some candy. He demands that his son tells him where he got the candy. The son just says Laughing Jack gave it to him. The father realizes the implications that this could have, and the severity that goes along with it. After all, this is a young boy who has received candy from a stranger. He demands that the son spits out the candy that's in his mouth and throws it away, once he realizes that the only answer the son is going to give is Laughing Jack. That night, the father tries to go to sleep but is awoken by his son screaming. He flies out of bed like any father would and goes to get his son. He sees that the room is trashed. Someone has been in here throwing things. He picks his son up out of his bed and runs out of the house. The cops are called to see what has happened. The police say that the perpetrator must have left after they heard the father coming up the stairs to get his son. The father says this is impossible, however, as all the doors and windows were still locked. The police also find that the family pet was killed by the perpetrator in the process. The father is on high alert now, increasingly paranoid that something is going to happen to his son. However, things die down for just a little bit, enough for the father to be comfortable. Then, he hears something in his son's baby monitor one night. It's laughter. At first he thought it was his son's, but as it becomes less and less faint, he realizes this is the laughter of a grown man. He flies out of bed and heads to his son's room, grabbing a knife to fight whoever has been plaguing his family. When he gets there, he sees his son is strung up on a wall, and he sees a clown in front of him. Its long nose like a beak. It is wearing a white suit with black stripes all around it. It is like someone took all the color out of a clown. Its long, matted hair, only serving to hide its eyes. The little glimpses he can see show it's deranged as the thing laughs in front of his son. The father lunges at this thing, knife in hand, ready to end it once and for all. But as soon as the knife gets close to hurting him, the thing disappears. The father's momentum, unable to be stopped, continues and plunges deep into his son. Candy pulls out of the wound the thing had presumably stuffed inside of his son. Someone heard the commotion and had called the cops. The father, holding the knife that had killed his son in one hand and hearing the police come in, realizes that Laughing Jack had won. Whatever this thing was, it got what it wanted. Laughing Jack, for as cheesy as a story as it is, actually does a decent job of building suspense. Obviously, you know that the imaginary friend isn't going to be an imaginary friend, but you know that going into any horror story of that trope. Unlike the other stories that we've covered today, Laughing Jack is one that I didn't particularly like when I was younger, but upon rereading it, I actually think that it's better than I remember it being. Now, like I said, there is an origin story to Laughing Jack, but even with all the stuff we've talked about today, it's a little depraved. Basically, Laughing Jack was like an imaginary friend who was actually good. However, when the boy he was friends with ended up leaving for school, Laughing Jack was left behind. His colors became desaturated as he had no one to amuse him for a time. We're talking years and years. But ultimately the boy did return, though as a grown man now. And he was into some absolutely diabolical things, which Laughing Jack witnessed, and having kind of been driven insane from being alone for so long, perceived that these things were fun. And that's basically how Laughing Jack becomes the murderous clown that we know in the initial story. Another famous creepypasta involving an imaginary friend would be that of Mr. Widemouth. Once again, after moving into a new house, a young boy starts seeing an imaginary friend. This being just a little fuzzy guy called Mr. Widemouth. I always pictured Mr. Widemouth as like a Furby with like a really big creepy smile. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, but just a fun tidbit. The boy is rather sick, which causes him to stay in his room for the majority of the summer. So he spends all his free time with his new imaginary friend, Mr. Widemouth, who keeps wanting him to do dangerous games. For example, he'd want him to juggle, but with knives. The most concerning of which was he wanted him to jump out a window. Now, the boy knows that if he falls from the second story, it will, unalive him. However, Mr. Widemouth says that if he imagines hard enough that there is a trampoline at the bottom, that he will bounce back up. The boy becomes more and more hesitant to play Mr. Widemouth's games, and ultimately just starts telling him no. Also, anytime the boy's mother would come up to bring him food, for example, Mr. Widemouth would hide. If Mr. Widemouth was imaginary, why would he need to hide? The boy becomes more and more eerie of Mr. Widemouth, outright refusing to play his games anymore, to which Mr. Widemouth is growing angrier and angrier. He wants the boy to come with him somewhere past the woods behind their house. But the boy, still feeling sick, doesn't want to. Not just because he doesn't feel well, but because he doesn't trust it anymore. He has this gut feeling that whatever Mr. Widemouth says to do, he should not. So when the boy finds out that him and his family are going to be moving, he doesn't tell his imaginary friend. On the day of the move, he remembers sitting in his father's truck and looking up at the window of his childhood bedroom to see Mr. Widemouth looking down at him, looking livid. It is the most angry the boy had ever seen anything in his entire life. The boy would go on to grow up and would mostly forget about Mr. Widemouth until one time he was in town and decided to stop by his old home. When he did, he saw that it was abandoned, that there wasn't much to it, but he saw that the way Mr. Widemouth wanted him to go through the woods, there was a path. He follows this path out of curiosity, wondering why his subconscious would want him to go there. And when he reaches the end of the path, he sees a children's cemetery. What I like about this story is that it doesn't go on to really explain things outright. We know that for whatever reason, Mr. Widemouth wanted the boy to end up, in that cemetery. But why it is, we don't know. Was it something this strange little being got power from? Or was it just some sick, demented pleasure? It's the unknown with me that really won me over on this story, more so than stories like Laughing Jack. Moving on to the next creepypasta, we have The Rake. The Rake actually started off from a group on 4chan wanting to create a new monster. And while there were plenty of fun and creative ideas, The Rake is the one that stood out the most. This thing is this pale, humanoid, hairless figure. Its motives seem relatively unclear, though what we do know is that it stalks people, not too dissimilar to the Slender Man. There's one story in particular that has a woman waking up in the middle of the night to see this thing sitting at the foot of her bed. When the thing notices that she is awake, it gets up. She sees that it is easily 6 feet tall, skinny. For its hands, it has long claws like razor blades. It takes off down the hallway. The woman screams and takes off after it. By the time she gets there, this thing has already attacked her child. Trying to stop the bleeding is no use. The child leans up and whispers in their mother's ears. He is the Rake. The Rake is a character I was never all that familiar with. It's always been one I've struggled to describe, not in appearance, but in story. The form of the Rake that always stood out to me was in the web series Everyman Hybrid. This was, like Marble Hornets, a primarily Slenderman-based web series. However, it also had characters such as the Rake incorporated in it. And this made the Rake absolutely terrifying, as I remember there is one part where it attacks one of the characters, and it is just well established that no one stands a chance against it. Even given how skinny and frail it seems, its strength is unmatched. The Rake is a really creepy design, who has been utilized very well in creepypasta and other creepypasta related media. Another fantastic creepypasta is that of Candle Cove. The main discourse of Candle Cove takes place in a chat room. Candle Cove was a pirate show meant for young children. It had young actors in it as well as puppets and the like, to really create a sort of Sesame Street or Muppets type feel to it. However, it was pretty low budget, and as they begin talking about it, they realize that the show was far more disturbing than they remember. One of the people brings up this character called the Skin Taker, who was an antagonist of the show. This was a pirate who was a skeleton, yet all their clothes seemed to be made out of skin. They realized through looking at all the human characters in the show that the skin that the Skin Taker wore, it had to belong to children that it had killed. They also remembered the cape and the hat it wore made out of the skin looking rather realistic. One of the people in the chat room remembers having a nightmare from the show, where they would be watching the show in their dreams, and yet all the characters would just scream, non-stop screaming and crying for the whole 30-minute duration, until she'd finally wake up. That is, until someone else in the chat room says, no, that wasn't a dream. I remember that too. They both recall it being a dream, and waking up from it, and yet it had to be an episode if both of them remember it, and then more and more people start saying the same thing. Everything hits its peak though whenever one of the people in the chat room says they visited their mother in the nursing home the other day, and asked them about Candle Cove. The mother began to laugh, to which the boy asked why. She said, I always thought it was strange that you'd say you're gonna go watch your little pirate show, and then would turn on the TV and watch static for half an hour. The mention of a haunted TV show or movie is nothing new to creepypastas though. There's a whole subgenre about creepypastas about these cursed TV shows called Lost Episodes. I'm only going to cover a few here. Perhaps someday I will do a whole video on lost episode creepypastas, but for the time being, I'm just going to talk about one or two, and honestly, for the most part, a lot of them are the same. So, and it's also with lost episodes in particular that I really need to censor what I say so YouTube doesn't get mad at me. So, please bear with me here. So, probably the most famous lost episode creepypasta is that of Red Mist. This is otherwise known as Squidward's unaliving himself. The story says that an intern at Nickelodeon at the time was watching a new episode of SpongeBob that had just made it out of the editing room. This was before it was to be published, of course, but it was showing that the progress was completed, and in case there were any critiques or anything, they would have to send it back. The first odd thing that pops up is that the title screen pops up and said Squidward's unaliving in place of what the episode title really should be. The intern and protagonist of the story shares that this isn't all that uncommon, as if they weren't being published, they would sometimes put joke titles at the start, sometimes leaning on the R-rated side of things, so this didn't alarm anyone. The episode starts off with Squidward rehearsing his clarinet for a recital that he has that night. You can hear SpongeBob and Patrick goofing off outside, to which Squidward opens the window and yells at them to keep it down. Then we cut to the end of his recital, and it didn't go well, to say the least. The crowd begins to boo Squidward, and what's strange is when it focuses on the crowd, you can see that their eyes are realistic. This is a trope seen in the majority of lost episode or haunted gaming creepypastas. To try and make something scary, a lot of the creators of these stories just said things looked real. For example, a cartoon character with realistic looking eyes is unnerving, sure, but when it is in every single story, it loses its charm. I talked about this in my Ted the Caver video, just as a side note, but good lord, reading all of these, it is very frustrating. Anytime anything creepy happens, just have the plot be like, and it looked real. Like, oh my gosh. Side tangent aside, this was a very popular trope at the time to have something look hyper realistic. Where it gets more disturbing is that throughout the episode, things flicker to real life of what seems to be a serial killer playing with one of the bodies of their victims, which seem to be children. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail there so YouTube doesn't get mad at me, but it flickers back and forth between that and Squidward sobbing in his bed. When we cut back to the cartoon itself, the shots tend to linger on Squidward's face. His eyes are hyper-realistic, and he's crying a mixture of tears and blood, causing his eyes to turn red. He stares into the camera for a while, just staring at the viewer. A shot pans out, and we see Squidward holding a gun. And we hear a deep voice say, "Do it," and then, as you can guess from the title, Squidward does it. With a lot of these, it's once you've heard one lost episode creepypasta, you've heard them all. Red Mist just happens to be the most famous. Another decent example of a lost episode creepypasta is a Simpsons one called Dead Bart. In this creepypasta, the Simpsons are flying on a plane, and Bart gets sucked out a window and dies. Now, when they show his remains, you can see that it is all sorts of mangled and destroyed, like someone would have been sucked out a window, not like what would be shown in a Simpsons cartoon. It cuts to shots of the family crying at the table, and it is noted that the cries sound too real. Not like voice actors crying, but like genuine, racking sobs of real people. At the funeral, you can see headstones of other people, these being celebrity guests on The Simpsons, but what makes it strange is that it has their dates of death, not just for those who have already been on the show and been deceased, but those who have not yet died. The viewer shares that many of these deaths have since come true. I feel as though you can't talk about lost episode creepypastas without talking about gaming creepypastas. These are much like the lost episode creepypastas, games where something has went terribly wrong. The most famous example of which would be Ben Drowned, the Majora's Mask creepypasta. Ben Drowned is a titan of a creepypasta. The story itself is rather long, but it is more so a titan because of how it's continued. The story started in 2010 and wrapped up in 2020. And yes, while there was a very long hiatus in the middle there, The simple fact of the matter is that there is a ton of content in it, so much so that it will likely get its own video one of these days. So I am going to very quickly paraphrase the original story as to not dwell on it for too long. The story follows a young sophomore in college who has been gifted a Nintendo 64 by his friend. With it, he had one game, Super Smash Bros., and he played the heck out of it, but eventually got bored and wanted to find some other games to play. So he hits up a lot of local yard sales nearby campus, and there's one that catches his eye in particular. There is an old man running this yard sale, of which the user says he feels uneasy looking at him. He's not sure why, there's nothing that seems particularly wrong with the man, but he said if there wasn't other people around in the broad daylight, it is unlikely that he would have approached this man. However, he does and asks if he has any old games. The man says he does and tells him to wait a moment as he goes to the back and hands him a blank Nintendo 64 cartridge. Now, usually the cartridges have a sticker on them that would share the game, but instead of having that, this one simply just says Majora's in Sharpie. This was the exact game our protagonist was looking for, and as such, he is stoked to finally be able to play it again. He purchases the game. As he's walking away, he thinks he hears the old man say, "Bye then," but he's not certain as something about it sounds strange that he'd figure out later. He goes home and inserts the cartridge into the N64 to play it, and sees that there is already a save file on it, titled Ben. It is then that it dawns on the user that the old man did not say "bye then," he said "bye Ben." The user assumes that the old man is likely at a later stage in life in which his memory is failing him, and something about the user reminded him of his grandson Ben. He sees that this user was pretty well at the end of the game, right outside of the final boss room. He decides he won't delete the new profile, but makes a new one in addition to it and simply names it Link. Things are going relatively normal at first, until he notices that the NPCs in the game are about 50-50 on if they call him Link or Ben. Thinking that this is a glitch with the old cartridge from the other save file, he decides to delete the Ben account. It is then that things get infinitely stranger. Characters now don't call him anything, and there are glitches that begin to appear. Now, for those that don't know, in Majora's Mask, you are on a time limit. You have 3 in-game days until the world ends, but you can do a glitch that adds an extra 4th day. So after the user does this 4th day glitch, things get out of hand. There's a lot to unpack here, so I'm basically just going to summarize the glitches that he runs into. The Link character begins dying a lot, all while Skull Kid, the antagonist of the game, just watches silently. Text boxes begin appearing in the wrong place, but it is as though it is interacting with or taunting the user of the game. At one point, Link erupts into flames, and the text appears from the Happy Mask salesman that says, "You have met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" This line has become iconic with the creepypasta itself. All this time, there is a statue of Link that you can create in the game that is following the user around. Now, in the game, you can create this statue by playing a certain song, and it will just sit still. However, this one is teleporting and following the user no matter where he goes. There is also more that comes in the creepypasta, such as, through an AI called Cleverbot, he is able to interact with Ben, and finds out that this boy had drowned. He guesses this because earlier, the save files that he had made had deleted himself, and resaved themselves as the first one being titled Ben, and the second one being titled Drowned, after his character had drowned in a lake. There is so much to talk about with Ben Drowned that it will likely get its own video someday. The most impressive part, I think, of the creepypasta, though, is that the user actually posted videos of the glitches himself. Now, of course, the creepypasta did not happen. It is not a true story. You can actually see all the glitches that he describes transpire before you, although it is not done through a supernatural element as it is in the story. It is just done by someone knowing how to manipulate the game in a certain way to make it do that. Another particularly interesting gaming creepypasta is that of Lavender Town Syndrome. Now, in the games Pokemon Red and Green, there is a town called Lavender Town that has a rather ominous tune playing in the background. It was said that on the initial release in Japan, that children who would hear this tune, due to frequencies that only children could hear, would end up taking their own lives. This, of course, would later be fixed for initial releases, and it was relatively covered up. Of course, this did not happen, but perhaps because of the theme itself, or just people's love for Pokemon and creepy stuff, this creepypasta is huge. Like, to the point that even my friends who don't really like creepypastas, but are into Pokemon, know about Lavender Town Syndrome. This creepypasta acts more as a gaming urban legend than an actual creepypasta itself, but it is still interesting nonetheless. Another creepypasta that is more of a gaming urban legend is that of Herobrine. I'm sure when I mentioned Minecraft earlier in the video, a lot of you knew this was going to get brought up at some point. Herobrine is an entity that is said to haunt the video game Minecraft. It is basically the default skin of Steve, though instead of having pupils, its eyes are completely white. It is said to haunt the game and grief your world. Some people believe that this is the creator of the game, Notch, his dead brother. However, Notch never had a brother, and if he did, why would he haunt a video game? But that's besides the point. What's fun with this creepypasta though is that Mojang has actually poked fun at it, and on patch notes have even had at the bottom of the list of all the stuff they actually fixed, removed Herobrine. Just a fun little tidbit. And then there is of course the infamous Sonic.exe. Sonic.exe follows a haunted Sonic game. In this game you don't actually play as Sonic, you instead play as Tails, Knuckles, and Dr. Robotnik. Each of them go through a level that seems normal at first. However, as they progress, they start to see things like dead animals, lots and lots and lots of blood, and when they get to the end of the level, there is a Sonic with black eyes, with like glowing red pupils, with blood coming out of his eyes that then turns to attack them. And then it comes out of the game and attacks the player themselves. It's likely that you all know about Sonic.exe. It's rather infamous. It was actually removed from the Creepypasta wiki for just not being great. However, what is really cool about it is that there is a fan game of it that recreates it, like, perfectly. Now, regardless of your opinion on the story itself, the fact that someone decided to go and make a fan creation of that game is a ton of fun. We're going to move away from gaming and Lost Episode creepypastas, as like I said, there's so much to dive into there that there's a very real chance that that'll end up getting its own video at some point, though I still felt that it was important to address some of the more famous ones here in this video, well, looking at the old creepypastas. There are a few creepypastas that are relatively short, and yet effective in their storytelling. Where the Bad Kids Go is a story about a photographer who was remembering their childhood in war-torn Lebanon, and in doing so, they remember a TV show they used to watch as a kid. The overall point of the show was to instill good values in kids and keep them from misbehaving and the like, but in doing so, it used a lot of graphic imagery as a scare tactic. One such scare tactic was that at the end of every single episode, the camera would zoom in on this old rusty door, and you could hear screams coming from the inside. As it did so, text would appear that said, "This is where the bad kids go." So the photographer actually manages to track this place down, and when they go in, they find the old rusty door. However, when they open it, they see a microphone hanging from the ceiling. The sound was not added in post. It was the genuine sound of real children screaming. Gateway of the Mind. This follows a group of scientists who believe that if you remove every single sense from a human being, that because there is nothing else left for them, they will be able to contact God. They find an old man who volunteers because he simply says he has nothing left to live for. So they go through and through various means take away his senses. He cannot feel, he cannot taste, he cannot smell, see, or hear. He is completely stuck in his mind. He begins to go insane, trying to end his own life, clawing at himself as he can't feel anything, desperate to feel something, and yet to no avail. The scientists end up restraining him, tying him down so he can't move. After some time, he begins whispering. He is able to tell the scientist about loved ones who he had no knowledge of that he is now interacting with. The most chilling thing happens at the end of the story, though. Right before the old man dies, regardless of the fact that he cannot see, he turns and makes eye contact with one of the scientists. He says, "I have spoken with God, and he has abandoned us." That story, for as short and sweet as it is absolutely chilling. That last line just fills you with such a sense of dread that it makes this story work so well for me. Another creepypasta about experiments gone wrong would be the Russian sleep experiment. Now, if you're familiar with creepypastas, you likely already know about this one. A group of Russian scientists did an experiment on political prisoners in which they wanted to see what would happen if the human body went without sleep. So they put these prisoners into a room and filled it with gas. This gas would keep them from falling asleep. The prisoners were locked in a room with the bare necessities. Inside of this gas chamber, the prisoners had books, food. They had cots, but with no bedding, as to not encourage them to sleep, but give them somewhere to sit. There were no live stream cameras at this time that they were able to use to monitor the prisoners, as again, this was in the late 1940s. So what they did instead was put a microphone in the room for them to talk into, as well as speakers for the scientists to communicate in with them. Things were fine for the first 5 days or so. However, the scientists noted that the conversations the prisoners were having were becoming darker in nature. On that 5th day, they began to become paranoid. They refused to talk to one another, instead whispering into the microphone, thinking that they could win over the researchers to let them out if they sold out their other partners. The scientists, however, determined to stick to their experiment, did not allow this to happen. On the 9th day, one of the test subjects began screaming, a loud, blood-curdling scream for hours on end. The scientists checked on him and saw that the only reason he had stopped was because he had torn his vocal cords. They noted what was strange though was that the other test subjects hadn't reacted at all. It wasn't long though until another one of the test subjects began screaming as well. Throughout this whole experiment, there were portholes that the scientists could look into and see them. They were one-way mirrors so that the prisoners could not look out. While 3 of the 5 prisoners were screaming, the 2 that were not took pages from the books that they had, smeared them in their own bile and feces to make the pages sticky and put them against the portholes so that the scientists could not look in. After doing so, the screaming stopped for good, as well as the whispering into the microphones. The researchers could see and hear nothing now. After the 3rd day of this, the researchers needed to check on the prisoners. They had armed guards go to the chamber and announce, "Back away from the door. If you comply, we will allow you to be freed." To their astonishment, though, they heard one of the test subjects say, "We no longer wish to be freed." This caused debate among the researchers of what to do. If the test subjects were still alive in there, then why not keep the experiment going? After all, their whole purpose of this was to see what effects it would have on humans. However, some still sensed that something was wrong, and thought it would be best to open the door and get them out of there. At midnight of the 15th day, the soldiers decided they had no choice. They opened the door and turned off the gas. Upon doing so, they heard 3 voices begging for the gas to be turned back on. What the guards found inside sickened them. Only 4 of the 5 experimentees were alive. Food had not been touched since day 5. Instead, the 4 remaining test subjects began eating the body of the deceased test subject. They found that the surviving test subjects had large chunks of skin ripped out of them, as well as flesh, but they noted that all the wounds seemed to be self-inflicted. They were doing this to themselves. The majority of them had ripped out their own organs and parts of their rib cage, really just leaving their heart and lungs still intact. The scientists, in an attempt to keep their subjects alive, conducted surgery on them. However, the test subjects refused to have any sort of anesthetic, instead preferring to be cut open and feeling every second of it, as it was far better than going back to sleep. They said they must stay awake. When it was time to return the test subjects to the experimentation chamber, the guards wanted to send one of the scientists in with them. After all, the previous attempts had had them refuse to go into the microphone, and they had also blocked all the portholes. Without someone in there, they couldn't know what was going on. The scientist refused, however, but after realizing he would be forced, he grabbed one of the guards' guns and shot the scientists as well as all but one of the remaining test subjects. He pointed his pistol at the thing that could barely be deemed as human anymore and said, "What are you?" The subject responded, "Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The scientist shoots the test subject in its heart, and with its dying breath, it says, So nearly free. The Russian sleep experiment is another creepypasta that I think did so well and became so famous because of how well written it is. The fact that it is some evolutionary trait to have humans sleep as to keep that thing from coming out is just such a profound thought that could be lurking deep within all of us, and that the only reason it isn't released is because we sleep. Moving on, we're going to talk about Rap Rat. Rap Rat is a board game that while you play, there is a VHS tape that goes along with it. However, for our narrator in particular, this goes horribly wrong. See, instead of the VHS tape playing what it's supposed to, and it begins showing disturbing imagery, such as bee stings or stuff happening with people's eyes and other stuff I can't mention because YouTube will be mad at me. The child rightfully flips out and quits playing the game, and ultimately his mother ends up getting rid of the game. However, some years later, the man is moving in with his girlfriend, and as he's getting some of his stuff, he sees in the top of his closet the Rap Rat VHS tape. Having all those awful memories flood back of what he saw the one time he played, he kind of panics and lets out a jolt. His girlfriend comes over and asks what's so scary, to which he just says, Rap Rat. His girlfriend laughs that he is afraid of a kid's game, to which he tells her what he saw. She doesn't believe him, and wanting to show that he's not crazy, he puts in the VHS tape. The same thing as last time happens, though he notes that the footage itself has changed. It still shows disturbing imagery, though this much more adult than it was the first time. Shortly following this, the man and his girlfriend start hearing things. In their apartment, they keep hearing scratching. They also can't shake this feeling that they are being watched. In addition to that, they hear outside their door what sounds like teeny tiny little feet, dragging something heavy. The man decides to solve his problem. He is going to sue the company that made Rap Rat. And when he looks into it, he finds that there is a story behind this curse. The company that made this supposedly did it in an area where workers' laws weren't great, to where children could work in harsh conditions. One such child, while constructing the rubber Rap Rat suit for the VHS tape, got sucked into the sewing machine. From that, obviously, became deceased. The mother went to the head of the company and demanded that something be done, who basically said, no one's gonna believe you, we don't care. It was an accident. To which she puts a curse from some spirit called Apparat. Now, the head of this company thinks that is funny and decides to do a play on words and rename the character to Rap Rat, kind of making fun of the woman. The issue is, though, as you can guess as this is a creepypasta, that the curse was real. Now, the people that played this game, such as our protagonist, are forever to be haunted by this spirit. The narrator and his girlfriend have tried destroying the VHS tape in the board game, but every time they do, it finds its way back in their house. Deciding that their only option is to keep it, they decide never to say Rap Rat's name, though on the rare occasions that they do, they hear the same scratching and thumping sound that they always hear. They know it is too late to turn back, and are afraid of what will happen if it gets any worse. Guess you could say Rap Rat's kinda cheesy. Get it? 'Cause it's a rat. Rats like cheese. Yeah, I'll see myself out. Before I do see myself out, though, I wanted to save a good creepypasta for last. I wanted to choose one that really embodies the time, so while this isn't exactly a Stephen King level story of well written, it is well written enough to be a good story, as well as cheesy enough and cliched with the tropes that it really fits that time and kind of puts a bow on all the stuff we've been talking. I'm sure many of you have guessed it by now, but the story we'll be talking about today is Abandoned by Disney. Abandoned by Disney is the story of our protagonist's exploration of Mowgli's palace. This was a Disney resort that was located near Emerald Isle in North Carolina. What makes it strange, though, is that this attraction was abandoned. This was in the 1990s, so by the time our protagonist is looking at it, somewhere between 10 and 20 years has passed. He shares the history of the place, saying that the residents were actually against the construction of the palace, though Disney persevered anyways, and it was finished. Visitors were actually able to stay in the resort. Yet for whatever reason, not long after it had opened, Disney closed it down. It is in doing research that our narrator finds out about another resort that Disney had abandoned, that being Treasure Island, which was later renamed to Discovery Island. This place was closed down, and sometime later, some urban explorers went and looted the place and found all sorts of cool stuff. Wanting to do that with Mowgli's Island, our researcher tries to find out any information that he can on it. However, whenever he looks for internet links, he can't find a single thing about it. He believes that Disney had asked Google to take down links so that no one could find out about it. Luckily for him, though, he had received an old map as a promotional item for whenever the place was opening in the 90s. He uses this and heads out on his way to Emerald Isle to get to Mowgli's palace. Upon his arrival, he is in awe of the place. Even in its decrepit state, he can tell that in its prime, Mowgli's palace was a work of engineering art. It is while taking it in, though, that he sees on a piece of scrap metal hanging up a message written. It says, "Abandoned by Disney." As he moves into the resort, he can see what was left behind of the Disney resort is clashing with the local wildlife. He describes it as a strange contrast of order and chaos that have come together to create a new ecosystem. In the middle of the whole thing, there is a statue of Baloo, who is the big bear character in the Jungle Book, which is what Mowgli's palace was based on. As he explores, he notes that every single door was kicked in, every single window was broken. Upon entering the kitchen, he sees that the food in the fridge had long since rotted, which created a putrid smell. However, whenever he goes to the big meat freezer, he opens the door and sees that hooks are swinging. He feels for a draft to check if anything could be causing them to do so, but when he feels nothing, he decides that it had to have been his footsteps or the door opening that caused them to do so. He grabs one of the hooks and holds it still, making sure that it doesn't continue to swing. He releases, slowly pulls his hand back, and it sits still for a moment until it finally starts swinging again. Unable to find a reason why this is the case, he simply moves on. His next stop is some of the rooms that the guests could stay at. He thinks that there must be a radio or television that is still on somewhere, as he can hear a voice coming from one of the guest rooms. However, as he explores them, he notes that there is no TV or radio in any such room. Fearing that there are some other people in the resort, he begins to back away and slowly head back to the entrance, as he does not want to end up being attacked by any crazy person that is in the resort, should they be there for any nefarious reason as opposed to simply exploring the area. When he heads back to the courtyard, he sees a statue of a giant python and notes just how good it looked. For him, it only adds to just what a wasted opportunity this place was. He takes a few pictures, trying to get close to capture every detail, but it is when he gets right up to it to capture the detail on its face that the python's head raises and looks at him. This is not a statue, this is a legitimate python. He jumps back, not wanting to become this thing's next victim. The python simply hisses and goes the opposite way into the woods. Feeling fortunate that the python decided to go the other way, he takes a deep breath, but quickly, a sinking feeling begins to take shape as he remembers where he's at. He pulls out his map to double check to make sure he isn't wrong, but he sees the exact location he is at was the old reptile house. This causes him to realize his fears have come true. He believed that whenever the resort was abandoned, that the company had simply left the reptiles and released them into the wild. That python, to him, proved that that was the case. Not wanting to be alone with something far more dangerous, or something more angry than the python was, he retreats back into the main entrance of Mowgli's palace. He finds a spot on stairs to sit down and try and compose himself. And when he does, he realizes that the stairs go downward, down into a basement that he had not yet explored. He goes down the staircase and sees that it ends at a metal door with a padlock on it. Unlike every other room he has been in, this door is not open. Every other thing had been looted or kicked in, but this door remained intact. However, it had been left abandoned for quite some time, and the natural wildlife had seeped in, meaning for him it was easy to pry open the door and get inside. He was ecstatic though, as this was an area no one else had explored. He would be the first one to see down here, since the place had become abandoned. And he was right. The inside was a nice change of pace compared to the rest of the location. Nothing had been looted or taken. Instead, the place looked like how it was when it had been left. Even a few of the lights overhead were somewhat working. They were on, though they were flickering on and off. He explores the place, noting that everywhere was like it was before it was left. What was strange though is as he went deeper into the underground, he noted that there were some desks and chairs knocked over. And because no one had been down here, that meant whoever had left had seemingly left in a hurry. Regardless, he gets to the room where costumes were kept. Unlike the previous one, he could not get this door open, no matter how hard he tried. Accepting defeat, he walked away, only to hear a metallic popping sound from the door. He spun around and saw that it was opening on its own. Figuring that he had just loosened it and decay had done the rest, he went inside the dark room. Unlike the rest of the location, it was pitch black. He used the flash on his camera as a sort of pseudo flashlight just to see if he was going to run into anything. Suddenly he hears a loud electric buzz, and overhead, the lights turn on, though once again they're all flickering. He sees the mascot costumes hanging on the walls, all except for one. There was a Mickey Mouse costume sitting in the middle of the floor on the ground. What was strange about it wasn't that it was in the middle of the floor instead of hanging up like all the others, but were its colors. It was the equivalent of a photo negative, as in all the colors were opposite. Where there was black, there should have been white. Where there was white, there should have been black. Something about it left him uneasy, though he knew there was no way he wasn't leaving without getting a picture of it. Though because of the uneasy feeling he got from it, he decided it would be the last thing he took a photo of. So he took some pictures of the ones hanging on the wall, and decides he wants a good centerpiece photo, something that will be really unique to take home. He cautiously picks up one of the Donald Duck masks, careful to make sure his hands don't damage it as it was still left to time to wear away. However, as he's holding it out in front of him, he feels something fall out of it and crash at his feet and shatter. He looks down, and though it was shattered, he could still tell what it was. He sees a human skull looking up at him. He didn't know why a skull was left inside of this costume or how it had gotten there, but he knows that if anyone's going to believe him, he's going to need proof. So he angles his camera down and decides to take a photo of it. Before he could, though, out of the corner of his eye, he can see the photo negative Mickey costume begin to stand up. It climbed to its feet slowly before staring at the narrator. The narrator, not knowing what to do, picked up the camera and aimed it at the thing. But as soon as he saw it through the lens, he saw every frame that surrounded the Mickey was pixelated. It was like static in the shape of Mickey Mouse, and he saw that it was walking towards him. And then, as though in an instant, the camera dies, leaving him alone with the Mickey costume. The Mickey walked towards him and spoke with a perfect Mickey Mouse voice. "Hey, want to see my head come off?" It began to try and take off its head. It began ripping and clawing at the seams, and as it ripped, yellow liquid began oozing out of the costume like blood. The narrator turned to run, hearing one final, sickening, wet sound of fabric ripping as the thing had completed taking its head off. As he ran, he saw one final message on the wall, calling back to the one he had seen when he entered the place. Instead of saying abandoned by Disney, though, this one simply said, abandoned by God. I thought that would be a fun creepypasta to end this video with, as it does a good job of setting up an atmosphere that is unsettling, while also still being hokey. I know while speaking, I kind of caught myself giggling at Mickey Mouse walk towards him in an ominous way. It's a very well-written story, in my opinion, but it's also still a little goofy. I think that alone sums up this time period. I know I missed a ton of famous creepypastas, and there were some that I wanted to cover in this, but upon review realized they themselves are too big to simply be narrowed down into such a small video. I did touch on Ben Drowned a little bit, which I feel was an exception, just because that is like the gaming creepypasta, so I wanted to cover that. But there are some other stories that I'd like to cover in the future in a whole video. Stories such as The Showers, Godzilla NES, and Pen Pal are these incredible stories that I feel I would be doing a major disservice to by summarizing them in a short little segment to fit in a bigger video. Those are stories that I think absolutely deserve their own videos. And some of these stories I covered today might also get their own videos at some point in time. I really wanted to make this video kind of encapsulate what old creepypastas were and what they felt like to me. In doing so, I made sure to use what I consider to be the heart and soul of old creepypastas, at least if you listen to them, and wanted the whole soundtrack to be done by Mew. Mew is the guy that makes all the creepypasta music you would have heard if you listened to Mr. Creepypasta or Creepsnickpasta back in the day. I've used his music in almost all my videos. He does a fantastic job. There will be a definite link to his channel in the description if you want to check out more of his music. And if you're anything like me, you might find a lot of it nostalgic even. But yeah, I apologize if I missed your favorite creepypasta. There's just way too many to capture in one video. This video is more of an introduction point for creepypastas, or a trip back to the past if you're like me and read them all at that time that they were coming out. I know I missed a ton, but I did my best to include what I felt were the most iconic ones. I know this video is long, so I don't want to take too much more of your time, so I do just want to thank you all so much for watching. This is a video I've wanted to make since before I started the channel, and I felt like now would be a good time to do so. I know some of you have been requesting more analog horror, and I promise I will be working on an analog horror video very soon. I have a couple series in mind that I'd like to cover, so it's just a matter of seeing which ones I can. In the meantime though, if you're in the mood for analog horror, and have already seen my Winter of 83 video, I would recommend checking out Soul Carney. He's a YouTuber who I am a huge fan of, who has covered a lot of analog horror series, and some lesser known ones too, which is a lot of fun. My personal favorite video of his would be his series covering Vita Carnis, an analog horror series, which is super good, and Soul Carney did an A+ job of covering it, so I will drop a link to him in the description. He does outstanding work. He actually gave me a shout out in his most recent video, which was so nice of him to do, and he beat me to the punch because I was going to shout out him next time I did a video, funnily enough, which is today. So, Soul Carney, if you're watching this, you're awesome, man. Keep up the great work. I love your videos so much, and thanks again for the shout out. That absolutely made my day. But that's pretty well going to do it for today. I do want to thank you all again for watching, and the support, as always, on the channel has been absolutely outstanding. I really can't thank you guys enough. Seriously, we just hit 16,000 subscribers, and that's just absolutely mind-blowing to me still, and I don't think it ever won't be mind-blowing to me that many of you have subscribed. So just thanks so much, guys. I know this video is long though, and I don't want to take up too much more of your time, so I'm going to go and end it here so I can edit it and get this out for you guys. So thanks again for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.